All right, I think we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you so much for joining us for our integration webinar with Theia Markerless. We're really excited to have them here today with Dr. Kim Duffy, our Vicon Life Sciences product manager. So before I hand it over to them to get started, just wanted to let you guys know the YouTube stream is up now. Looks like this room is getting pretty full, so that stream is out there if anyone else is trying to join. It'll be on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Vicon right after this, so you can share it. The Q&A section is open, so we'll be answering some questions at the end. You can go ahead and start submitting those. We'll have a poll that we launch here in a little while. We've had 4 webinars this month, so make sure to go and check out that YouTube playlist. We have a ton of topics, a lot of integrations, some industry panels, and a lot of great content for you to catch up on after this. So make sure to follow us on Twitter at Vicon. That's the best place to find out about upcoming events. I also post all the details to vicon.com/events. And you can always send any questions to me at marketing@vicon.com. And if you'd like to collaborate with us on a future event, make sure to contact me. So with that being said, I'll go ahead and hand it over to Kim.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for the introduction, Alicia. As Alicia said, I am Dr. Kim Duffy, the Life Sciences Product Manager at Vicon, and today is our 3rd Life Sciences Partnership webinar. We're going to be talking about multimodal data fusion in motion capture. So multimodal is using different technology techniques together, and data fusion is about combining those pieces of data to produce a seamless solution. I'm pleased to be joined with Dr. Scott Selbay, the CEO of Theia Markerless and Director of Research at C-Motion. So before I hand across to Scott, I'm just going to go over the agenda for today. So Scott's going to be talking about Theia Markerless, what the company does, provide an overview of some of the research outcomes in collaboration with Queen's University. Following on from this, I'm going to be introducing Vicon Nexus 212, the Theia integration workflow, and we're going to then finish with a live demo and a Q&A session. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen to allow Scott to do his.
Okay. Okay. Can everybody see that, and can everybody hear me? Actually, only Kim can tell me if she can hear me. Thanks very much, Kim. I really appreciate this. This is really a presentation about the integration of Theia with Vicon, but we will start with a little bit about Theia for those who don't know it. Theia Markerless, it's me in part. I'm one of the co-founders. Most people probably know me from C-Motion and Visual 3D. C-Motion has been playing around with markerless tracking for a number of years. But officially, we launched a spin-off company, Theia Markerless, that acts independently. As Visual 3D is generic, it works with most data inputs that come in, including other markerless systems. I've stolen this from Kim. You'll see her present this later. You'll see on the right side of this image, or at least the right side that I see, you'll see a fairly traditional marker-based representation. And on the left, you see bones with no markers, no sensors. This is what we're trying to do, is see how far we can get without influencing the recording. Theia is based on multiple cameras, an array of video cameras, typically 8. I'll get back to that. That's because our internal mandate, what we're trying to do is be accurate. It may not be the most efficient or the most convenient, it's not on your phone, but we do believe that it's the most accurate. What we're doing with Markerless that's perhaps different from some people is that we really are trying to do biomechanics. We're not so much interested in the surface of the body. In fact, we don't even track the surface of the body. We're interested in representing the bones so we can calculate dynamics. We can treat it like everything else people do in biomechanics. What you see here is kind of face validity. This is a colleague from Japan. And what you can see is the video image on the left with a three-dimensional skeleton overlaid on it. So that's actually a 3D representation, not a 2D representation from one video just fit to look good. Oh, there we go. That disappeared on me. It's the 3D. You can see the skeleton on the right. I'm going to explain a little bit about the technology in a second. So what were we trying to do? It starts, and then this is hardly our thought or our motto even. This is what we chose to do along with a lot of other people. If you're going to measure performance, especially high performance athletes, then you have to measure them in context because you don't want to influence the performance. Even in a clinical gait lab, the preference would be not to influence the subject, to not go through any kind of standing trial or functional trial or any manipulation of the subject. They should be as unaware of the recording as is possible. And our goal is, we believe this is an evolution of human motion tracking, and our goal is high fidelity, robust, across activities, so a generalized solution. Can we go in the field? If you have the right video images, I'll probably say that more and more. The critical link to all of this is getting the right video images. So if you have the cameras focused on an individual on a field of play, you can track them. This one's not really live. This is obviously just on a field. But you can track an athlete, at least on the field. But you can track them in a game, as has been shown by other companies. Given the same video images within a game, we can track them in a game as well. So how do we do it? For 3D accuracy and to deal with occlusions, so we're not totally inferring everything, it's based on a synchronized array of video cameras. What we have are really two deep neural networks, one to recognize people in the scene and identify who's who, because you have to have the same person from every view. Then we have a deep neural network that just recognizes features of the body. It's not trying to track a silhouette or identify a cloud of points, really. It's going in and finding specific features that the neural net has been trained on. I'll show you a little bit of that in a sec. Because it's biomechanics. In the end, we do want to fit a multi-body model to this and do a fairly traditional multi-body 3D pose estimation. Traditional in the sense that the data you get out can be processed and analyzed the same as whether it came from an inertial sensor or a marker-based system. And lastly, we're trying to do the experimental validation. We're working with Queen's University. I will show you some of that. COVID's got in our way just a little bit. The lab's closed again. But here's kind of the process. First, this is in a laboratory. One of the interesting things from a data collection perspective or an investigator perspective is there's no standing trial and no preparation. So that people working in the lab, this is the lab engineer and the lab manager in Dr. Kevin DeLuzio's lab at Queen's, they can play around when the subject's not there. They can just run into the volume and record whatever they want to. What you'll see is a different color bounding box around each of them. That's our identification. We're not identified them as Rob and Sean, but as blue and orange. We're trying to be careful not to present people as themselves. This is Marcus, and I'll stop this, COVID hair and all. This is Marcus Brown, who is the originator, so to speak, of what we're doing. Marcus started with me a long time ago as a summer student when Kevin DeLuzio's lab started working with Visual 3D. And over time, Marcus has just been there. And eventually it was Marcus who wanted to do the markerless on his own and give it a shot. What you see is the start of this. If you look very carefully, you'll see a lot of blue splotches on the image. Those are actually probabilities of features of the body. Not identical to where features are from markers were placed, but features that we can train a neural network. So we have a neural network that's being trained on well over 500,000 people. I'm not sure how many images. At this point, we're tracking 51 features of the body. I refer to them as anatomical features, but only some of them are anatomical. Joint centers are anatomical, and that's pretty common amongst all the markerless tracking. We track other features, mostly features that we can reliably identify on the body. And then from those features, we define a skeleton. The skeleton in Visual 3D, or Theia 3D, I think it's both really. What distinguishes it from some markerless is we have enough features that the head is tracked with 6 degree of freedom, the thorax with 6, the pelvis with 6, the feet with 6 each, the shoulders with 6. We're not totally constraining it. We can constrain it if requested by the user, but most of the joints, and eventually all of them, will be 6 degree of freedom. Okay, the last thing I'm going to talk about, this is Dr. Kevin DeLuzio's lab at Queen's University. This is Elise, his postdoc right now, and Rob Kenko is his master's student. There are 3 publications, well, I should say 2 publications. The first one was just spatiotemporal. This is a comparison on a treadmill of marker-based and markerless, and overground with markerless against a gait right map. And the only difference of note, this is a hugely crowded table, and you can read it to your heart's content, other than stride width, for which we have a little bit of uncertainty in how that's measured. The rest of them are essentially the same. So we can get the core event detection. And that is now available online, Journal of Biomechanics. This is the most important one to me anyways, repeatability. Can you measure the same thing each time someone comes back? Not, can you measure to some comparison accuracy, but if the subject's gonna come back 3 times, you wanna know if changes are meaningful. So this is a study where graduate students at the university told to come into the lab with whatever clothing they were wearing, and lo and behold, grad students tend to dress the same. But these are 8 subjects, 3 different visits, so a week apart between each visit. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but here we have the joint angles. And what you'll see is the overlay of session 1, session 2, and session 3. In the sagittal plane, you can hardly tell the difference. They're just over top of each other. As you get to axial rotation of the segments, we're certainly not as consistent, but you can see the variability from week to week. We're measuring more or less the same thing. And that's measured in a lot of ways. But again, this article is now available online and you can go read it for yourself. Here's what people ask for. This one's hard. This one's hard, even theoretically. How do you do a comparison of different ways of measuring the same motion? How do you compare markerless to marker-based? Well, we've run down a lot of separate paths. We've tried to ensure that they have the same reference frame, same coordinate systems of every segment, force them to be the same, and then you're left with a decision. Well, which one do you believe in? Which of these reference frames, marker or markerless, do you believe in? So in the end, we said, I don't want to make that choice. So we've left that variability in there, in that the coordinate systems are determined independently from the different marker sets. Second, our markerless system was not trained on any marker-based data. So, but you can't do marker-based without markers. So when you have a marker sitting on top of a feature that we're trying to track, it kind of gets in our way. That's unfortunate, but I don't know how else to do this. Here's my last slide. This is the markerless comparison. You'll see flexion extension to the far left. What you see is marker-based in blue, markerless in red. And in flexion extension, as everybody expects, they're pretty close in terms of segment angles on the left. They're still close, AP, a little bit of bias at the foot. And axial rotation is a bit more variable. What was unexpected from this study, and this study is 30 subjects, what was unexpected is the variability in the marker-based is higher than the variability in markerless. The right is joint angles, and now you can see more of the bias. Partly it's because the pelvis is represented differently in the two models. But you can see again that variability across subjects is less for markerless. That's kind of the rundown on who we are and what we're doing. And back to you, Kim. However, I give it back to you.
Thank you, Scott. So before I go into the Theia integration, I just want to kind of bring back where Vicon came from. So long before my time, we were progressing our optical technology to make it better and better. But now we're at a point where we and others are really seeing the value of combining different technologies. And that is what multimodal is all about. One of the things I realized as a product manager is if there are different technologies out there being used and one doesn't fully take over all use cases, that means there is something about each of these modalities which are of value. And as Scott said, and why all of you are here, during the last decade, markerless motion capture techniques have gained an increase in interest in the biomechanics community. We appreciate the level of accuracy and reliability compared to optical isn't quite there. So why combine optical and markerless? With this rise in markerless interest, our users are wanting a way to facilitate combined data capture of different modalities and access this software in a streamlined manner. The University of Ottawa is one of the Vicon Theia customers who are evaluating this rise in technology. And for their first phase, it's all about validating how this compares against optical. So before discussing the workflow, I want to briefly discuss the system setup Theia requires. So Theia requires a minimum of 6 video cameras. However, they do recommend 8 video cameras. For Vicon, the Theia integration, we're using the Vicon View video camera. This camera has a varifocal lens, which allows the ability to adjust the field of view. A requirement for Theia is it must be able to see both the head and feet to successfully track subjects. As the View video camera has a varifocal lens, this enables the field of view to be adjusted for the desired motion and subject video capture. And with our cameras and with this system setup, we have individual Ethernet cables, which ensures we get sufficient power and allows a user the ability to easily move cameras for their desired motion capture. We know thermal drift is one area that affects motion capture accuracy. Therefore, we advise our camera warm-up period before calibration and a controlled ambient temperature. And under some circumstances, such as temperature changes, lenses can change calibration, and it can make it difficult to reuse factory lens parameters in all circumstances. And we are the only motion capture provider that updates the intrinsic component of the calibration process. So we're no longer using the linearization grid method as a factor. So having the ability to recalculate the internal calibration parameters is desirable as thermal drift affects system accuracy. So we can account for this by our calibration procedure. So this is the Nexus Theia workflow. So as you can see, the first component is Nexus 212, and this is where all the data is captured. And one of the great things about this integration is that everything can be controlled within Nexus. So the second component of this is Theia, which can be automatically launched in Nexus 212, and then it'll process the video data. And then finally, once you've had that data processed on the video trials, we're then able to bring that data back into Nexus and calculate the joint outputs. So what I'm going to do now is briefly go over each components of these before we go into a live demonstration. So as I said already, all data is captured within Vicon Nexus 2.12. So firstly, all cameras are connected within the system. We then calibrate our optical and video cameras in there as Theia requires synced, calibrated video data in order to process. We then prepare our subject, if there's going to be markers on there, if it's video only, and then finally we go into data capture. So for those of you that are already familiar with the Nexus data capture process, this is exactly the same if you're also capturing video data for Theia. The next step is data processing. So the first step is we transcode the video files. So the Vicon view camera records uncompressed. So the user has the ability to choose the best quality codec for their video data needs. Theia requires a specific codec to process the video files. So Theia runs on the NVIDIA graphics card, and it only supports those graphic card solutions. So by capturing uncompressed video, as the codecs improve over time, we're allowing our users the ability to improve their video quality. Once you've transcoded the video, that's when we can launch Theia, and this will automatically run and process your video files. Firstly, by loading in the calibration and then running through the video data. Once Theia has finished its process, it then can export a C3D file. Again, this is automatically exported and can be read in by Vicon Nexus. One thing to note with this C3D file is Theia only exports the rotational 4x4 matrices, so there's no joint calculated data within that C3D file. And then the final process is the data analysis. So firstly, what we want to do is merge that rotational C3D file that's produced by Theia into Vicon Nexus. So you have all your data in one C3D file. And then after you've merged that trial, you're then able to run the calculations and generate the joint data. For us today, I'm going to be showing one workflow, a full Vicon solution. Users can use Visual 3D if they wish, but today we're going to be showcasing ProCalc 1.5, which can be run as a pipeline operation directly within Nexus. So what I'm going to do now is stop sharing my screen, and we're going to start sharing the lab PC. Great, so what we're going to do firstly is we've got our subject ready to go, and we're going to capture a couple of trials.
Yeah. So in your own time, how do you just start walking across?
So for purpose of today, we're only going to capture 2 trials. One of the things you'll notice when we're processing through Theia is Theia does take a little while to process the video trials. and this is why we're only going to do 2 today. So as I said, once you've captured your trials, we then can transcode that file to the right codec for Theia to read. Now we could do this as a pipeline operation, but as I said, just for today, we're just showing you a step-by-step. So once the file's been transcoded, what we can do, as you can see at the bottom, there is a Theia tab. So this Theia tab is our interface that allows you to specify the folder that you want to process all your files to. So imagine here if we'd have captured 20 trials, what we can do is specify the folder here as we're showcasing now. And when we press run on this, it'll firstly identify how many video trials it can process, and then it'll automatically launch Theia and start processing each trial one by one. So you can see the first process, what it's done, it's automatically loaded in the video trials and also the calibration. Now, the benefit of running this through the Nexus Theia batch interface is that what we can do at the same time while processing the Theia data is a user can then analyze and process their Nexus trial data. So what we can do is do this now while it's being processed. So as you can see, our Nexus trial is now processed. So Nick, if you go back to the Theia trial, please. Thank you. And do you want to increase it slightly? Just a little bit. Perfect. Scott, do you want to describe the process of what's happening in Theia, please?
Sure. The first step, as I mentioned before, is to find the subjects, which is really identification. But with one subject, it's really not that grand a deal. But if there's anyone in the background, it will try to track them as well. The second step is the feature identification. At each frame of video, it identifies all of the features that it can see from each of the cameras, and then it combines those into a 3D probability distribution of those features. And like everything else in biomechanics, essentially you have 3 markers, non-collinear, that as a minimum that represent the pose of the subject. In Theia, some segments have more than 3, most do have 3 features. Once you have, oh, I can't tell where we are here. I guess we're still identifying the features. The neural network, and just, I've got time here, obviously. The complexity of the model you get in the end is similar to the complexity of model you can get from marker-based. The more markers on more segments that are distributed widely, the more complex a model you can build. So in Theia 3D, we track as many segments as we can with 6 degrees of freedom. What's kind of unique about Markerless is that the core data is the video data. So as the algorithms improve, as we're constantly annotating, we have 9 people just annotating videos this summer. As the algorithms improve, you can always reprocess your data. So you're never stuck with, you can't change from however you're collecting legacy data. You can always reprocess or reanalyze everything. And one of the weird and wonderful things about the deep neural networks, the feature recognition, is every time you add a feature, all features get better. So a little different than a standard optimization where every time you increase the number of variables you're trying to compute, they find more local minima or there's less accuracy. With deep neural networks, every time you add a feature, all features get better. We must be now looking at the inverse kinematics. It's the same kind of inverse kinematics that Visual 3D has in the sense that there's some flexibility in the degrees of freedom. But because it's really faster, it doesn't look faster on the screen here, because it really is faster than what we're doing in Visual 3D. There's a little less flexibility, but nevertheless, it's well more than we need for most biomechanics stuff. The flaws in the ointment are always the video data. The ability to focus the lens is really critical. We always, our preference is to see a subject that's 300 to 400 pixels tall. If you have a subject that's 200 pixels tall, the feet and hands are blobs. And it's really hard to build a 2-segment foot out of a blob. I think we're probably near the end of this processing here. Is that it? Someone can tell me.
Yeah, we have. It does cancel it. So what we're going to do is open up the first trial, which we already can see from the screen. As I talked about earlier, right now, if you go into subjects for me, Nick, under subject, and break it down. Model outputs, perfect. What we're firstly going to do is add that rotational information that was run through Theia and put it through. So what you can see is once that trial's been added in, if you drop down the rotation information there, Nick, for me. Perfect. So that is the 4x4 matrices that gets generated by Theia. So what we've done is merge that information back into the original Nexus C3D file. And then from there, what we can then do is generate the joint output information. And we're using the ProCalc 1.5. So we're going to run that scheme. So now what we've got, we can see that we've got the outputs not only from Nexus, but also from Theia. So what we can do then is select them, and then we can do direct comparisons if we wished. And what we did also earlier, so you can see that we've got both the Theia and plug-in gate data there. So you can see here, like so. So that's got both the video data and also the optical on top. And then what we also did earlier today is we executed a Python script that then exports the report out of comparing Theia and Vicon together. So we'll just share that, which is here. So the way Theia defines its pelvis is slightly different to plug-in gait. So this is where you can see the slight differences here. But then if we scroll a little bit down to the hip and pelvis, like so. So then you could do comparisons between right for the walking trial versus left. So if we just go quickly back to Nexus. So you probably noticed during the webinar, we did have Theia close on us a few times there. Now, one of the good things with this integration is that it will automatically launch back. So if for whatever reason Theia stops processing for whatever reason, it will relaunch it, Nexus, and carry on the processing. So that's what we were just sorting out there. Can you stop sharing and I'll share my next screen? So all we've got to say now is thank you for joining us. And if you have any questions for myself and Scott, we're happy to take them. So if you want to put them in the Q&A section. So I'm also going to post a
talk right now, Kim?
Yeah, of course.
I want to say that's commendable. Live demos are so stressful and you're not even in control of the computer you're trying to demo on. That's amazing.
Thank you, Scott. Okay, we've got 4 questions here. They all seem to be related to you, Scott, so I'll read them out.
Sure.
The first one is, what is the minimum number of cameras needed without compromising accuracy? Why typically 8 cameras?
8 we're quite comfortable with, so that if you lose a camera for whatever reason, somebody bumps it and you lose its calibration, then you still have 6 left. 6 is okay. If you get less than 5 or less, the results do degrade. Now, in the big picture, the next question should be, well, if I ask the right question of the system, can I go all the way down to 1 camera or can I use 2 cameras? We're still exploring all this. Right now, focusing on accuracy of pose estimation, you want at least 6 cameras.
Great. The next question is, how long do you expect before this becomes widely used option for 3D motion capture in research settings similar to marker-based systems currently?
Next week. I know that's flippant. It obviously, Kim mentioned, it depends on what you're recording. For a lot of activities, straightforward activities, walking, running, jumping, I think it's ready for prime time right now. At least the comparison studies that have been done and the repeatability would suggest that's true. For really complex movements, 2 people holding each other, carrying each other, it might be a little while before we can dissociate the 4 hands of people. But I'd say right now people are using it, so it's ready.
Great. Next question again for you, Scott. Have you guys looked at the upper limbs in pitching, hitting? If so, is this in the works for publication?
It's not in the works of publication. Yes, we have. We are working with groups that in baseball. It's a bit challenging to do a markerless comparison in baseball. The face validity is good. Face validity really meaning you look at the video image, you look at the 3D overlay, and it all makes sense. That's fine. If you measure kind of end effector velocities, it all looks fine. But a direct markerless comparison is not in the works by us. That doesn't mean there aren't people that have started that. I just can't tell you that because that's their data.
I'm sure whoever asked that, they'll probably follow up with you if they had any more follow-up questions. How do factors such as video camera resolutions, capture rates, and environmental lighting impact the skeleton reconstruction and biomechanics outcome calculations from Theia?
I'm not sure I have enough time to answer that one. It's a great question. We expect, or Theia expects, to see good contrast in the image. And good contrast is dependent on the aperture, on the lighting, and on the frame rate, really. Frame rate, so we want good contrast. In terms of resolution, it doesn't matter what the resolution of the camera is. It matters how big the subject is on the image. So we prefer, in order that the hands and feet look like hands and feet, we prefer the subject to be about 400 pixels tall in the video image. Speed, identical with marker-based or optical tracking. If you have a really fast movement, you need a high sampling rate. There's not really any way around that. Or at least you need very short aperture time so there's not motion blur, because motion blur will affect it. It's the system's focused good video images are critical. I can't sugarcoat that. They're critical.
Yeah, I think I can also add to that, Brian. From investigations we've done internally and also our joint customers, we found lighting is really important, and clearly having a good contrast. If you're able to see the joint by eye, then Theia will track it a lot better than if you've got a really baggy clothing on, for example. So there's many different factors for sure. But I'm sure they'll be able to give you some more information if you're interested. The next question is a Vicon question. What is the maximum frame rate that can be used for the Vicon view? That's 120 Hertz. The next question, I think kind of already answered with the one above, so I'm going to go on to the next one. What do you suggest for storing the raw video files, and when should you delete them?
Well, I wanted to say keep them, keep the raw video files, because they can always be reanalyzed. That's your core data.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the question for you more, Matthew, is are you wanting to change the codec afterwards? Is there something you wanting to do to reprocess? If not, if you're happy with that codec and that process, then delete them. But ultimately, you are deleting the raw file if you do that. Yeah, I kind of answered the one from above. So the next question, does sampling rate affect accuracy? We've already talked about the maximum sample rate for the view, but there's also a question for you, Scott, in terms of what is the maximum sampling rate for Theia?
The issue is motion blur, so let's separate that. If there's no motion blur, then sampling rate is totally irrelevant to Theia. Theia is processing frame by frame instantaneously and then just stringing all the frames together. Motion blur is an issue, but if you don't have motion blur, as high as you can record on the video is fine.
Perfect. Next one is the software able to detect a part of the body, only certain body parts, such as the upper, lower body, when the body is not fully visible?
Yes, but there's a big caveat here. Yes, because it's tracking just features. If it doesn't see a feature, it doesn't track it. It'll make a guess, but that guess will be unreliable, and that's noted. So if there's only enough information for the one arm, it will track one arm. The caveat really is that neural networks they're more effective when they see all the features they're trained on. So yes, you can track a single arm, or you can track just the hands. It's actually more accurate if you can see more of the body. But maybe that doesn't matter to your research question. There'd be a reason you're only tracking one arm. Could be fine.
Perfect. We're getting loads coming through, which is great. How accurate is Theia for foot kinematics? Can you consider foot as a multi-segment?
Okay, ask me that one again, please. I was distracted by lightning and thunder here. Sorry.
So how accurate is Theia for foot kinematics? Can it consider foot as multi-segments?
Yes, but multi right now too. Ask me that question again in September. It's, if you can see it by eye, if you can see multi-segments, which you can, then Theia will track it. But of course, you got to imagine we have to see enough resolution on the foot for that to make sense. But yes, a multi-segment foot model is coming. Currently, it's a forefoot and kind of a midfoot, hindfoot combined.
Great, there's more questions coming through, so we've got a few more. I'll try and get a couple more done. Contrast in the video seems important. Will it have a large effect if the subject's wearing white or bright colored clothing? The subject in one of the studies seems to wear all dark colored shirts and pants.
Yeah, it matters. It would, in that study, we were saying, what would some person that just showed up in the lab likely be wearing? And it turns out that all the students kind of dressed the same. It would be preferable to see contrast. If you had black pants and black shoes and a black floor, you probably couldn't see the features by eyes, and so Theia's going to struggle with it. So, but right now, from what we've seen in most laboratories, it's usually lighting is the issue, not the clothes people wear or the background. It's lighting.
Yeah, I've just been reminded that your video is not on, Scott, so people are asking to see your face.
I didn't even know I could be seen.
Yeah, so whenever our video is on, we can be seen. So there's a few more questions. Can Theia work with non-anatomical body parts, so like prosthetics?
No. Well, not now. Theia is a trained neural network, meaning that it only recognizes what it's seen before. We've played around a little with transfer learning to try to recognize other objects, just not released it yet. If you had a prosthesis or something like that, and it kind of looked like a foot and a leg, we'd track it. If you had a crash test dummy, it would track that. The more it looks like the anatomical features, the better we're going to be able to track it. But no, we can't do something totally different like a sea leg for running. We can't do that.
So this one is, hey Scott, when identifying features in Theia 3D, is there a cutoff probability such that it will be used to define the bones?
Not explicitly. The user doesn't have any control over that. That's a very subtle question. Outlier detection is critical, so that you would vary the probability you'd allow based on what you're seeing. If you had 3 cameras that were really reliable and one that was just good, the good one wouldn't be used. If you had 3 good ones, you'd probably use all 3 good ones. So it depends, and it's a context dependent thing. So there's no real magical threshold.
That's great. So I'm going to move on to the next question because they're all flooding in, which is great. This is from Jenny. Great presentation, thanks. How flexible is the model in Theia? Can you adapt it? Also, how transparent is everything in terms of calculations? That's the one thing I really appreciated about Visual 3D. So one of the things we have done is within Vicon we created a ProCalc scheme to be able to define exactly how those rotational segments are defined as a segment, burn lengths and everything, and then exactly how the outputs are then calculated. So I've just asked my colleague to do right now, if I stop sharing, is we have yeah. So what we have here is, if you go, we have a skeleton of, that is our visualization of the Theia bones, because it's markerless, you can't see anything, so we need something to be able to see. And then what we then have is the ProCalc scheme, and then if you go to the variable, it then shows you how this is defined. So Jenny, this can also then be expanded if you wanted in ProCalc, or if, as you mentioned, you're a Visual 3D user, then you could also do that as well in Visual 3D and modify the model output, because you have all that rotational information. Thank you, Nick. The next question is, with using dedicated graphics card for processing Theia data, it limits the portability of the PC and also increases the cost. Are you looking into alternatives for processing power?
No. I'm hesitant there, of course. It's just how tightly integrated. So the GPU processing, we actually even scale back a bit from maximum so you don't burn the cards up. But we're running about 90% capacity on the cards, and not every card is capable of that. Even now, all of the GPUs out there, they're all different. They all have different engines and different ways of working with them efficiently. So we have to have a different installer for each graphics card. And we just can't do too many graphics cards. The alternative, the alternative is, of course, processing in the cloud. And this is something we played with. But right now, with a focus on research labs, most research labs want to keep the data in-house. They don't actually want to let us process it, so to speak. They want to have it for themselves. I don't blame them. Certainly, if you're dealing with professional athletes, you don't want data from professional athletes floating around the world too much. Someday we will, but not yet. I'm not sure it's going to make it that much cheaper to process in the cloud, though, but it is a possibility.
Yeah. So I'm just going to try and answer as many of these questions, because there's some great questions coming up on. So the next question is, repeatability in studies have been performed on healthy individuals. I was wondering if there is also being assessed in patient populations, for example, people with bony deformities or irregular movement patterns.
Irregular movement patterns are fine, because on a still image, they look like the kind of people that the data set's been trained on. So movement disorders are fine. Deformities, it depends where the deformity is, of course. If a joint doesn't look like a joint, or a hand doesn't look like a hand, we will struggle with it. There are people trying to test this. And yes, the studies that have been published are all control subjects, really. We do have plans to do more. I know there's some people looking at it. So people that have looked at cerebral palsy, for example, now, it works fine. So disorders of movement are fine. Deformities, it's hard to quantify that. The worse the deformity, the poorer we're going to do, but I don't know what a measure of worse is.
Yeah. So following on from that question, is there any problems you'd anticipate with younger children or toddlers or infants? Has Theia been used?
Yeah. If it looks like a person, so we've done 2-year-olds, and it looks fine. We've done 80-year-olds, and it looks fine. It's so far, it's hard to measure. Again, the accuracy of a 2-year-old with markers or inertial sensors and markerless is a hard study to do. But face validity, meaning does the skeleton look like where you expect it? Yes, we're not having a problem with children.
Great. So the next question is, we've kind of talked about it briefly, but what are the limitations regarding clothing type? And is there any clothing type that's recommended?
Actually, we haven't recommended anything other than decent contrast. So if you wore a long skirt, it's going to struggle to find the hips. If you had an overcoat, what's kind of interesting is you will get an answer. Not as reliable, but because of the way the neural network works, it will infer a solution. You will get a skeleton out of someone wearing a long skirt or a long coat, but it's impossible to imagine that it's as accurate. Really, what we're saying is, not too baggy, and contrast with the background.
Perfect.
And that study has, people have tried to do that study. That's one of the ones that's shut down by COVID. So we're waiting.
Great. I'm trying to answer some of these questions while we're talking. Is there any interest in detailing the model of the hand for a markerless system?
Yes, we in beta right now, we have a hand model that has 21 features. So it has 4 fingers and a thumb in the hand. That is in development, in testing. It will be available fairly, it's hard to say when, but soon.
Perfect. So the next question is Theia available within the standard Vicon software license, or is there a cost to have access to Theia? So Martin, within Nexus 2.12, you will get the Theia integration. There will be an additional cost for the license for Theia. So Scott will be able to give you more information on that.
Yeah, just contact us. But if your question is there an additional cost for Nexus? I don't think so. It's just the cost of Theia. Is that correct, Kim?
Yeah. Well, if you already own Nexus, then
yeah.
It's only the Theia that you require. And because we can use ProCalc to calculate the joint data, you then wouldn't have the additional cost. If you need a visual 3D, you could run it through ProCalc. So we'll just try and do a couple more questions because we are getting on, but there's some great ones. Has the construct validity been tested? How well can Theia detect known differences where they exist in movement, especially hip kinematics, base of the pelvis, thighs are covered by shorts?
We need a lot more data than we have right now on the 30 subjects that we've tracked in comparison with markers, with the reliability, a couple of degrees, but that's really a vague answer. We can see differences. They're really quite consistent. We've started a study that will be eventually 1,000 subjects, but that data is not ready to say much about other than we're getting there. But it's a question, of course, that's really important, and we don't really know yet. So if you did ratios, which is what was done in the article, and you just said, how much, is there a difference in variability? Is there a difference in the signal over weeks? The ratio of inter-session to an intra-session is 1% or 2% only. So they're really very close from session to session.
Perfect. So I'm just going to do one more, and then what I'll do is I'll put in, I'll screen share the slide again. So if you have any, if we didn't answer your question, please then do contact us. So finally, can the deep neural network be fine-tuned with your own collected data, or can it be used for transfer learning for a different task? Is the original training data and source code publicly available for research purposes?
No, the source code and the training data is not available. That is proprietary. We have not made it possible to add your own data to it directly, although there have been labs send us data from their lab to add to the training set for them, and we have done that. There is evidence that the particular movement you're tracking, the particular environment within which you're recording, if that data is added to the training set, it does improve the results. So it's something we will do for people, but we don't know how to support it. So right now, we're not making that available for users to do.
That's great. I'm going to call it there because I appreciate with time and everything. So you should be able to see on the screen our contact information. So if you do have any questions or we didn't answer the questions today, please contact either myself or Theia, and we're happy to answer any further questions. This is the results from the poll that you'll be able to see. And just thank you for joining us today, Scott. It's been a pleasure. And
no, thank you.
You're welcome.
Much appreciated. Thanks to everyone out there that I wish I could see.
Yeah, hopefully we'll be able to see everyone in person very soon. So thank you, everyone. I'm going to now end this recording.